The silence was worse than the tension had been. It stretched thin over everything I did, every shift at work, every late-night meal eaten standing by the sink, every moment I lay awake listening for footsteps in the hall that never came. I kept expecting relief. Instead, I felt exposed. The apartment no longer felt like a refuge. It felt like a waiting room. The wall seemed closer, the air heavier, as if the space itself knew something had changed and was holding it against me. I replayed every word. Every pause. Every look. Think carefully about what you're agreeing to. Had I agreed to anything at all? On the third day, I found the notice still on the table where Daniel had left it. I hadn't touched it. The paper had curled slightly at the edges, absorbing the dampness in the air. I picked it up, my fingers brushing the crease where it had been folded. A deadline. An ultimatum disguised as patience. I imagined him on the other side of the city, calm, controlled, waiting. I wondered if this was how he always handled things. If I was just another quiet calculation in a life built on leverage and restraint. The thought unsettled me more than it should have. That evening, I heard the elevator stop on my floor. The sound made my heart stutter. Footsteps followed. Familiar ones. Measured. Unhurried, they stopped outside my door. No knock this time, just the presence. I stood frozen in the middle of the room, every nerve lit up, listening to my own breath. Seconds passed. Then more. I told myself I was imagining it, then my phone vibrated. A single message. Daniel, are you home? I stared at the screen. My fingers hovered, uncertain. Me, yes. The response came almost immediately. Daniel, open the door. The word sent a chill through me, and not because of what they demanded, but because of how little explanation they offered. I opened it. Daniel stood there looking different. No jacket. Shirt slightly rumpled. Like he'd come straight from somewhere else, somewhere real. I won't come in, he said before I could speak. Not unless you ask. The restraint again. Deliberate. Almost cruel. We stood in the doorway, the hall light casting sharp shadows across his face. He looked tired. Human. I wanted to be clear, he continued. About boundaries. I nodded, unsure what to say. Or what I offered, he said, was time. Space. Nothing more. And the rest? I asked quietly. His jaw tightened. The rest, he said, is what we're both pretending not to talk about. The hallway felt too open, too exposed. Do you want to come in? I asked. He searched my face, as if weighing consequences one last time. Yes, he said. I stepped back. Inside, we didn't sit. We didn't touch. The distance between us was charged with everything unresolved. I need to know, he said, that if this continues, it's not because you feel trapped. I laughed softly. Isn't that the problem? I don't know anymore. Daniel nodded once, accepting that. I won't take anything you don't give, he said. And if you want out, say it. Even now. I looked at him, really looked. At the man behind the authority. The hesitation he tried to hide. What if, I asked, I don't know what I'm giving yet. Silence. Then, slowly, Daniel reached into his pocket and placed the notice back on the table. I'll wait, he said. But not forever. He turned to leave. At the door, he paused. This only works, he added without looking back, if we're honest about wanting it. The door closed softly behind him. I stood there long after he was gone, heart racing, mind unraveling. Had anything actually happened, or had everything already changed? Because now the choice wasn't just about rent. It was about desire, power, and the terrifying realization that I might be complicit in crossing a line I didn't yet know how to name. The rain had begun as a soft patter, tapping rhythmically against the window pane, a sound that usually calmed me. But tonight, it felt intrusive, almost accusatory, echoing through the empty apartment like a reminder of everything I hadn't said, and everything I shouldn't have thought. I sat on the edge of the bed, my fingers tracing the worn fabric of the comforter, trying to will my racing heart to slow. Jamie wasn't home. He should have been. He always was, punctual in his habits, meticulous about dinner, the TV remote, the way he left his shoes neatly by the door. But now, the apartment was unnervingly still. Even the hum of the refrigerator sounded louder, stranger, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I kept glancing at the door, half expecting it to open, half hoping it wouldn't. Jamie's absence was unusual, but more than that, It carried a weight I couldn't name, a tension that made my stomach twist and my hands tremble. Memories of our childhood flickered unbidden, whispered jokes in the dark, moments of accidental closeness, laughter that sometimes felt too charged, too intimate. I had buried those thoughts, convincing myself they were nothing, yet tonight they surfaced with a stubborn persistence. A sudden creak in the hallway made me freeze, every nerve in my body taut. My pulse quickened. Was it him? Or someone else? My hand drifted toward the small note lying on the kitchen counter, folded neatly in his unmistakable handwriting. I hadn't noticed it before. Meet me tonight. Don't tell anyone. The words were simple, almost innocent, but they throbbed with a strange urgency. I swallowed hard, feeling a mix of curiosity and fear knotting in my chest. Could I go? Should I? Part of me wanted to call it off, retreat into safety, pretend the note had never existed. But another part, one I didn't fully understand, was drawn forward, pulled by a tension that had been building for years, subtle and unacknowledged. Between us the apartment felt colder now, shadows pooling in the corners like silent watchers. The rain intensified outside, a relentless drum against the glass. And somewhere deep inside, I knew that the choice I was about to make could change everything. I ran a hand through my hair, heart hammering, mind spinning with questions I didn't have answers to. Had he really been joking all those years ago? Or had there always been something unsaid, something forbidden, waiting to be discovered? The thought sent a shiver down my spine, both terrifying and exhilarating. I rose from the bed, slipping on my jacket, every movement hesitant, as if I were walking toward the edge of a precipice. Outside, the storm continued, each drop of rain a reminder of the night's potential, a night that promised revelations, danger, and a crossing of boundaries I had never imagined. And as I opened the door, stepping into the shadowed hallway, I couldn't shake the feeling that nothing would ever be the same again. This introduction sets a calm yet tense atmosphere with rain, shadows, an empty apartment, introduces the narrator and Jamie, hinting at their complicated past, includes inner monologue. Reflecting curiosity, fear, and unresolved tension, ends with foreshadowing of a forbidden, dramatic night to come. I can now continue with the rising action, 1,200 to 1,500 words, escalating tension, introducing the main conflict, and deepening the characters' relationship. Do you want me to continue with that next? Not because of noise, but because of its absence. The hum of the refrigerator. The distant rush of traffic. The occasional drip from the kitchen sink I kept meaning to fix. These were the sounds that reminded me I was still here, still existing, even when everything else felt uncertain. It was late autumn, the kind of cold that crept in slowly and stayed. The city outside my window glowed in tired shades of orange and grey, streetlights flickering like they were debating whether to keep going. I wrapped myself in a thin sweater and sat at the small dining table, staring at my phone. No new notifications. Rent was due in 3 days. I'd been here long enough to learn the rhythm of this place, morning silence, afternoon shadows, nights that stretched longer than they should. I liked routines. They made life feel manageable. Predictable. Safer than thinking too far ahead, but lately, the routine had cracks in it. I felt it when I counted my money for the third time and the numbers still didn't change. When I avoided calling my parents, knowing exactly what questions they'd ask. When I lay awake at night, wondering how freedom had started to feel so much like isolation. I told myself I'd figure it out. I always did. A sound from the hallway broke my thoughts, footsteps, measured and unhurried. They stopped just outside my door. I held my breath without realizing it, listening. Nothing happened. A moment later, the footsteps moved on. Still, my chest stayed tight. You're imagining things, I told myself. You're tired, but the feeling lingered. There was a knock the next afternoon, firm. Controlled. I opened the door to find Daniel standing there. My landlord. He looked exactly as he always did, clean-cut, calm, eyes sharp but unreadable. The kind of man who didn't waste words. The kind who noticed details people thought they were hiding. Can we talk? He asked. I stepped aside automatically. The apartment felt smaller with him in it. More exposed. He glanced around, taking in the neatness, the deliberate order. His gaze lingered a second too long, like he was seeing more than furniture. You're late on rent, he said, not unkindly, I know. Silence stretched between us. I waited for the lecture. The warning. The inevitable conclusion instead. He said, How are you holding up? The question caught me off guard. I hesitated. Too long. His eyes flicked up, something unreadable passing through them. I can give you a little time, he continued. But we should be clear about expectations. My pulse quickened. Clear how? I asked. He studied me, as if deciding which version of the truth to offer. That depends, he said slowly, on what you're willing to be honest about. The room felt suddenly warmer. Or maybe that was just me. As he turned toward the door, ready to leave, he paused. Think about it, he added. I'll come back. The door closed behind him. I stood there long after, heart racing, staring at the space he'd occupied. What exactly was he asking for? And why did I already know that when he returned, the conversation wouldn't be just about rent anymore? I moved through it carefully, like any sudden noise might expose something I wasn't ready to face. The couch still held the faint impression where he'd stood nearby. The table felt like a boundary line I kept circling but never crossing. Nothing had happened, and yet everything had a days past again, but this time the silence felt intentional. Deliberate. Like we were both holding our breath to see who would blink first. I went to work, smiled when required, laughed when expected. No one noticed how tightly I held myself together, how every quiet moment threatened to split me open. I checked my phone more than I cared to admit. No messages. I told myself that was good. Professional. Safe. But at night, when the city dimmed and the sound softened, my thoughts grew louder. I replayed his voice. His pauses. The way he had stopped himself more than once, as if restraint were a choice he made over and over again, not a rule he followed. That scared me more than if he'd crossed the line, because restraint could be withdrawn. On the fifth night, I came home to find an envelope slipped under my door. No name. No stamp, just my address, written neatly. My hands trembled as I picked it up. Inside was a single sheet of paper, not the notice. A revised agreement. No threats. No ultimatums. Just options. Time. Conditions written in careful, neutral language, as if nothing personal existed between the lines, but I knew better. At the bottom was a handwritten note. Read it carefully. If you sign, we change the rules. If you don't, we go back to pretending nothing ever happened. Pretending. I sat on the floor with my back against the couch, paper spread across my knees. My chest ached with the weight of the decision. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about what kind of truth I was willing to live with. The next morning, I ran into Daniel in the lobby. By accident. At least, that's what we both pretended. He looked composed. Professional. Distant. Good morning, he said politely. A morning, I replied. We stood there as the elevator doors opened behind him. Neither of us moved. I got the document, I said quietly. His eyes flickered. Just once, take your time, he replied. No pressure. A lie, but a kind one. As the doors began to close, he spoke again. Whatever you decide, he said, make sure it's yours. The elevator shut. I stood alone in the lobby, the envelope heavy in my bag, my heart racing with questions that had no safe answers. Was this power dressed up as patience, or was it something more dangerous, something mutual? That night, I placed the paper on the table. Picked up a pen. Set it down again. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, low and slow. I stared at the signature line, my reflection faintly visible in the polished surface of the table. I wondered what would happen after my name touched the page. Would I still recognize myself, or would this be the moment everything finally slipped, quietly, willingly, out of my control? The pen hovered and the clock kept ticking. He stood near the table, fingers resting lightly on the edge, as if grounding himself, or testing how solid everything was. I stayed by the door, suddenly unsure where I belonged in my own apartment. The rain outside had softened into a steady murmur, like the city was holding its breath with us. So, he said at last, voice calm, almost casual. How long has it been tight? I swallowed. A while. Not a lie. Not the truth either. He nodded slowly, as if that confirmed something he already suspected. His gaze drifted around the room again. The clean counters. The folded blanket on the couch. The absence of clutter. You keep things neat, he said. I don't like mess, I replied. I don't like evidence, I almost added. He finally sat, crossing one ankle over the other. The chair creaked under his weight, and the sound felt too loud. Too intimate. I don't enjoy evictions, Daniel continued. They're unpleasant for everyone. My chest loosened just a little, but he added, eyes lifting to meet mine, I also can't ignore missed payments. There it was. The balance. The warning disguised as understanding. I nodded again, my fingers curling into my sleeves. I'm working more shifts. I just need time. How much? I hesitated. He noticed. That small pause, less than a second, changed something in the room. Daniel leaned back slightly. Not aggressively. Comfortably. Like a man settling into a conversation he intended to finish on his own terms. Sit, he said gently, gesturing toward the couch. I obeyed. The cushions dipped under my weight, familiar and suddenly foreign. My heart was pounding hard enough that I worried he might hear it. Or worse, sense it. I don't think this is just about time, he said. The words landed softly but left a bruise. I stared at my hands. A thin scar on my knuckle. A reminder of another bad decision, years ago. What do you mean? I asked. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Outside, a car horn blared, then faded. Somewhere upstairs, a door slammed. Ordinary sounds. Normal life continuing without us. I mean, he said carefully, you look like someone who's been carrying more than just late rent. I let out a short laugh. Bitter. Unintended. Everyone's carrying something. Yes, he agreed. But not everyone looks like they're about to disappear. That did it. My throat tightened, and for a second I couldn't speak. I hated how easily he saw through me. Or maybe I hated how much I wanted someone to. I won't disappear, I said finally. I just need options, he finished for me. Our eyes met. Something passed between us then. Not attraction. Not yet. Something sharper. Recognition. He stood and walked toward the window, looking out at the rain. His reflection overlapped with mine in the glass, two figures sharing the same space, separated by more than a few feet. I grew up watching my mother beg landlords for extensions, he said quietly. They never helped her. Not really. I didn't know what to say, so when I say I'm open to alternatives, he continued, turning back toward me, I mean it. Alternatives. The word echoed in my head. I shifted on the couch, suddenly aware of how close he was standing now. Not invading my space. Just close enough to make me aware of his presence. Of his warmth. What kind of alternatives? I asked. He studied my face, as if deciding how much truth I could handle at once. That depends, he said, on how honest you're willing to be with me. My pulse jumped. About what? About why you're really here, he said. Why you're really alone. The question hit harder than I expected, because it wasn't just about money. It was about the nights I came home to silence and felt relief instead of loneliness, then guilt for feeling that relief. About the calls I didn't return. The truth I only admitted to myself in fragments. Daniel waited. I stood abruptly, needing space, and moved toward the kitchen. My back to him felt safer. I pretended to fuss with the kettle, even though I had no intention of making tea. I don't think my personal life is relevant, I said. He didn't argue. That's fine, he replied. But then neither are personal solutions. The kettle clicked loudly as I turned it on, the sound filling the silence I didn't know how to cross. Look, I said, exhaling slowly. If you're here to tell me I'm out, just say it. Daniel sighed. If I wanted you out, he said, you'd already have the notice in your hand. I turned around. He was closer now. Close enough that I could see the faint line between his brows. Close enough to notice he looked tired too. Then why are you here? I asked. His eyes flicked briefly to my mouth. Just for a second, long enough, because, he said quietly, sometimes people don't need deadlines. They need leverage. The word sent a chill down my spine. Leverage against what? Against me. Before I could respond, there was a sudden sound, sharp and metallic, from the hallway outside. Like something being dropped. Or kicked. We both froze. Daniel's expression shifted first. Alert. Focused. Did you hear that? I whispered. He nodded. The sound came again. Closer this time. Then footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. My neighbor, maybe. Or someone who shouldn't be there. Daniel moved instinctively toward the door, one hand raised slightly as if to signal me to stay back. The apartment felt smaller than ever, the walls pressing in with each second that passed. The footsteps stopped just outside. We waited. A shadow passed under the door, then silence. After a long moment, Daniel exhaled and lowered his hand. Probably nothing, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. But something had shifted. The interruption had broken the fragile rhythm between us, replacing it with something more dangerous. More intimate. Daniel turned back to me, his expression unreadable now. Think about what I said, he told me. I'll give you a little time. How much? I asked. He hesitated. Enough to decide, he said. But not enough to avoid choosing. He walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the handle, and for what it's worth, he added without looking back, I don't make offers like this lightly. The door closed behind him with a soft click. I stood alone in the apartment, the kettle screaming on the stove, my heart racing for reasons that had nothing to do with rent. What kind of decision was I being asked to make, and why did the thought of saying no feel just as terrifying as saying yes? The air felt too still, like the city had exhaled and forgotten how to breathe again. I sat on the edge of the couch, lights dimmed, every sound amplified, the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock, my own pulse in my ears. I'd spent the entire day arguing with myself, say no, say yes and survive, say no and start over, say yes and lose something you can't name. The knock came just after 9. Not loud. Not hesitant. Confident. My chest tightened as I stood. I caught my reflection in the darkened TV screen, tired eyes, jaw clenched, shoulders drawn inward like I was bracing for impact. I opened the door. Daniel stood there without an umbrella this time. Dry. Composed. He looked less like a landlord tonight and more like a man who already knew the outcome. Can I come in? He asked. I stepped aside again. He paused inside the doorway, as if giving me one last chance to change my mind, then closed the door behind him. The click sounded final. Louder than before. You look like you didn't sleep, he said. And neither did you, I replied, surprised by my own boldness. A faint smile touched his mouth, gone as quickly as it appeared. No, he admitted. I didn't. We stood there, the space between us charged with everything we hadn't said. I moved first, retreating to the couch, needing the distance even as I invited him further into my world. He followed. Slowly, I thought about what you said, I began, my voice unsteady. About leverage. Daniel didn't interrupt. And about honesty, I added. You asked why I'm really here. Why I'm alone. He sat across from me, elbows resting on his knees now. No crossed legs. No professional distance. I'm listening, he said quietly. I took a breath that felt like it scraped my lungs. I ran, I said. From my family. From a life that didn't fit. I told myself I was being brave, but really, I was just afraid of being seen. Daniel's eyes softened, just slightly. I thought freedom would feel lighter, I continued. But it feels empty. And expensive. The corner of his mouth twitched. Freedom often is, he said. Silence settled between us again, heavier now because it carried truth and you. I asked suddenly. Why do you do this? He blinked. Do what? Control, I said. You could have sent the notice. You didn't. Daniel leaned back, studying the ceiling as if the answer might be written there because, he said after a moment, rules are easier to follow than people. And sometimes, I want to know what happens when someone chooses me instead of the system. The word sent a shiver through me. Is that what this is? I asked. A test? His gaze locked onto mine. No, he said. It's an offer. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the folded notice. Set it on the table between us. The paper looked heavier now. Like it carried a weight far greater than ink and deadlines. Sign this, he said, tapping it lightly, and we proceed the normal way. My eyes flicked to it, then back to him. And if I don't? His hand stilled. Then, he said carefully, we talk about the other arrangement. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. What arrangement? I whispered. Daniel stood. The movement startled me, made me instinctively lean back. He didn't touch me. Didn't need to. His presence filled the room. I give you time, he said. More than time. Stability. And what do you get? I asked. He hesitated. That hesitation changed everything. I get honesty, he said finally. Access. Trust. The words were vague. dangerous in their ambiguity, and if I can't give that? I asked, then this ends tonight, he replied. Cleanly. I stood too, the space between us shrinking until I could smell his cologne again, something warm, grounding. My thoughts raced, colliding into one another. This is wrong, this is survival, this is desire wearing a mask. You're asking me to blur lines. I said yes, he agreed. I already have. My breath caught, the clock ticked loudly in the background. Seconds passing. Choices closing. What happens if I say yes? I asked. Daniel's eyes searched my face, not predatory, not gentle, intense. Then nothing happens, he said slowly, unless you want it to. The room felt too quiet. I thought of the nights I'd lain awake staring at the ceiling. Of the fear of starting over. Of the fear of becoming someone I didn't recognize. I stepped closer, close enough that the air between us felt charged. And if I say no? I asked again. He swallowed. Then you pack, he said. And I never crossed this line again. I reached out, not touching him, just hovering near his arm. My hand trembled. This isn't fair, I whispered. No, he agreed. It isn't. Our eyes held, time stretched, and then, almost without realizing it, I nodded just once. Daniel exhaled, the sound shaky, like he'd been holding his breath longer than I had. He didn't move closer. Didn't claim anything. Instead, he reached past me and turned off the lamp. The room fell into shadow. Tonight, he said softly, we stop here. The restraint startled me, but this, he added, his voice barely above a whisper, changes things. In the darkness, I felt it too, the shift. The irreversible crossing of a line that couldn't be uncrossed simply because we hadn't touched. He moved toward the door. Think carefully, he said before leaving. About what you're agreeing to. The door closed. I stood alone in the dark, heart racing, body buzzing with fear and something dangerously close to anticipation. Had I just saved myself, or had I traded one kind of debt for another, one that would come due in ways I couldn't yet imagine?